Hello, my name is Ashley Pullman, and I'm a research associate at Social Research and Demonstration Corporation in Canada, a nonprofit research organization that also develops field tests and evaluates new programs and policies. This research was undertaken with my colleague, Dr. Ross Finney, when we were both at the University of Ottawa. Today, I'm going to showcase the findings of a study that examines the relationship between socio-emotional skills and how they relate to employment outcomes using administrative linked longitudinal data from a nationally representative sample of adults in Canada, a portion of whom also took the PIAAC study. As this is a Canadian study, it may not be familiar to everyone, so I'm going to spend a bit of time providing an overview of these data. First, however, I'm going to provide a bit more context as to why this research is important given current policy and research directions. As it's clear to most PIAAC researchers, there's increased interest in social emotional skills given the addition of survey items aimed to measure these attributes. Along with studying social emotional skills with adults, the OECD has heightened interest in studying these skills with school-aged children. In Canada, there's also new national policy interest in skills with a new skills framework, which is termed Skills for Success, and includes defining and promoting what are considered two areas of social emotional skills, adaptability and creativity. In these contexts, the Big Five inventory is used to study social emotional skills, understood as broad groupings of related attitudes, preferences, and behaviors. Due to time constraints in large-scale assessment and the need for consistency of skill measures, the BFI is frequently used. And in Canada, the longitudinal component of PIAAC followed up in 2014 with survey items that included the 15-item short version of the BFI, which captures individual differences in these 5 domains on the slide. Here's one way we conceptualize each domain with having both a trait-based definition as well as a skill-based definition. For example, agreeableness, when conceptualized as a trait, is the motivation to maintain positive relations. When conceptualized as a skill, it encompasses learning that may help promote cooperation and collaboration. With these domains of measurement available, the study examines how they relate to employment and earnings, how associations differ by gender, age, and immigration background, as well as differences across the earning distribution. The final question here on workplace activities is part of the study and available on request, but due to the time of the presentation, I'm not going to cover it here today. So let's talk about the data. So in Canada, the LISA is a household survey, and it's sponsored by a federal department focusing on labor market related social programs. It's administered by Statistics Canada, which means that these data are only available in secure research environments. It's biannual, so it started in 2012 with PIAAC, and in 2020 was the last wave, which will be released shortly, but isn't available for analysis yet. Like the PIAAC study, the target population was based on the 2011 census in Canada. It's representative of non-institutionalized individuals who are not living on First Nation reserves in Canada, which are specific allotments of land controlled by First Nations band here. So around 1/4 of the LISA sample are non-respondents with limited information collected about them through other household member. This study uses data from both the PIAAC and non-PIAAC respondents, both of whom answered the BFI in 2014. Our analysis approach was to replicate the regression models with all responding participants, as well as just the PIAAC participants, so we could examine the interrelationship between cognitive and social emotional skills. So due to time, I'm only going to give a brief overview of the indicators and the analysis approach. The general analytical approach involved running a series of regression models with 4 different specifications that corresponded to the variables included. So first, we just modeled the BFI domains, which we call the baseline model. Second, we have the BFI domains and control variables that measure a variety of individual characteristics, including male-female, age, immigration background, Indigenous identity, province of residence, self-reported health, years of full-time work experience, children living in a respondent's house, and partnership status. Third, with the full LISA sample, we add a measure of highest credential level. And fourth, with the PIAAC only sample, we add education and a measure of 3 numeracy skill level categories that we group as 0 and 1 as one category, skill level 2 and 3 as another category, and skill level 4 and 5. Models 1 to 3 are also estimated separately for males and females and by different age groups and immigration background to compare the BFI estimates across these subgroups. There's also supplementary analysis that includes interaction terms rather than separate subgroup models. Again, due to time, I'm just going to show the results for all respondents as well as some of the results for males and females separated. Due to the binary nature of the outcome measure, the analysis on employment status is based on a linear probability model. It takes the value of 1 if a person is employed and the value of 0 if they are not employed. For earnings, we use 2 regression approaches: ordinary, least squares, and quantile regression analysis. We also have additional sensitivity analysis that uses Heckman's selection correction procedure to correct for those who had 0 earnings. Using unconditional quantile regression model, we examine ranges from the 5th to the 95th points in the earning distribution. So I'm now going to jump into the main results. For the full LISA sample, we find in model 1, which only includes the BFI domains, that a 1 standard deviation higher conscientiousness score increased the likelihood of employment by 2.2 percentage points. This effect is reduced to around 1 percentage points in models 2 and 3, which add additional controls. Without controlling for other factors in model 1, emotional stability is also positively related to employment status. That is, for each standard deviation increase in emotional stability scores, the likelihood of being employed increases by 2.2 percentage points. However, once we include other explanatory variables, this effect is smaller and no longer statistically significant. In particular, health status here is an important control variable when modeling emotional stability. For the PIAAC LISA sample, which we don't show the results here, the regression results are more or less similar. That is, including numeracy level doesn't change the relationship between these BFI domains and employment status compared to a model that only controls for education level along with the other explanatory variables. The models separated by gender based on the full LISA sample indicate that conscientiousness is positively related to employment for women across models 1 to 3, but there is no statistically significant relationship for men. For each standard deviation increase in conscientiousness scores among women, the likelihood of employment increases by 3.7 percentage points in model 1 and around 2 percentage points in model 3. In contrast, emotional stability is positively associated with employment for men, but not for women in models 1 through 3. The supplementary interaction models largely support these findings, showing a positive interaction for women in conscientiousness and a negative interaction for women and emotional stability. In examining log earnings, we find that conscientiousness and emotional stability also have positive returns to earnings in models 1 to 3. In the full specification model, each standard deviation increase in conscientiousness scores is associated with 3.8 percentage higher earnings, and each standard deviation increase in emotional stability is associated with just over 3% higher earnings. We also find that openness and agreeableness has a negative return to earnings in the full specification model. Here, each standard deviation increase in openness scores is associated with 6.8 lower earnings, and each standard deviation increase in agreeableness is associated with 4% lower earnings. These results are interesting as they relate to somewhat inconsistent findings in prior research on the relationship between openness and earnings. There's some suggestion that people with high openness scores are more likely to work in artistic jobs, which pay less in Canada. Although we don't show the results, individuals who have high openness scores are actually more likely to have really high sort of workplace ability measures. So they're more likely to train others, to negotiate, to influence, to engage in time management, as well as undertake simple and complex problem solving. It could be that this is tapping into a set of skills that are very effective in the workplace, but not necessarily rewarded monetarily. In terms of the association between agreeableness and lower earnings, this confirms results from a large number of studies. There's some argument that there's an inverse relationship between agreeableness and striving for personal success, power, and influence, those factors being associated with higher earnings. I'll return to some of these discussions shortly. We also find clear differences for men and women surrounding the association between earnings and the 5 BFI domains. We find that the negative relationship between openness and earnings is only present for women, as well as a positive association between conscientiousness and earnings in the full specification model. Although the coefficient is somewhat similar to men, which is not statistically significant. Both men and women have an agreeableness penalty to earnings, although only men have a statistically significant positive relationship between emotional stability and low earnings. When we look at prior research, there are mixed results in terms of gender, with some supporting these findings. When additional BFI results are available for a wider PIAAC-based population and participants, it'd be worthwhile to look into these and other gender differences and how they relate to economic experiences in more depth. Moving to the quantile regression results, this graph here shows returns to openness across the earning quantiles. The horizontal axis shows the results from 7 separate models examining the 5th to the 95th quantile. The horizontal axes, the vertical axis represents the coefficient or point estimates that measures each earnings return, be that negative or positive, below that center line of 0. The black line is model 1 without controlling for other factors, and model 3 controls for all other indicators. So here for openness, we find the returns, in this case negative, are stronger at lower percentiles than at higher percentile points in the earning distribution, although there's a large standard error which really suggests this instability in this point estimate. When looking at the estimated effects of earnings and conscientiousness, the results are clearest for those actually at the top of the earnings distribution. Here, for each standard deviation increase in conscientiousness scores, earners in the top 95th percentile earn approximately 6% more in both the baseline and the full specification models. We're not showing the results for extraversion because there really isn't many results going on here, so I'm just skipping over to agreeableness. And this figure here shows that all earners across all percentiles have negative returns to agreeableness in model 1, but the effects are again generally stronger and more negative for those at the lower part of the earnings distribution. In particular, earners in the bottom 5th percentile earn about 20% less for each standard deviation increase in agreeableness scores in model 1. The estimates, however, are greatly reduced and mostly non-significant in the full specification model. When looking at emotional stability, in both the baseline and full specification models, the positive returns to emotional stability are again greater for lower earning individuals. For example, earners in the bottom 5th percentile earn 19% more for each standard deviation increase in emotional stability scores in model 1, although the return is estimated to be only about half that magnitude and is no longer statistically significant in model 3. For the 50th quantile and above, the estimated effects are approximately half as strong as for the bottom quantile, and generally close to 0 in model 3. So to recap, our goal in the study was to broadly look at how social emotional skills relate to employment and earnings both before and after accounting for individual characteristics, education attainment, and cognitive skill level overall, and across different subgroups. Further analysis also demonstrates if and how these returns differ among high, mid, and low earning individuals. The findings show that social emotional skills clearly contribute to labor market outcomes, even when accounting for a pretty large variety of individual characteristics, education, cognitive skill level. People in Canada who have high conscientiousness scores are more likely to be employed and earn more. Emotional stability is also positively related to earnings, especially for men, while openness has a negative relationship with earnings. Finally, people with high agreeableness scores earn less, an earnings penalty that is particularly pronounced among high earners. Here, those skill-based policy often focus on promoting cognitive skills, including essential skills such as literacy and numeracy to support schooling and employing outcomes. Research is consistent with broad findings in the literature that social emotional skills are also related to these outcomes, both on the individual level, as seen in terms of employment and earnings. There really is more conceptual work needed to understand why these relationships are present. For example, initially it may be easy to see why there's a relationship between emotional stability and employment outcomes. However, why this relationship would only be present for men and not for women needs more theorization and empirical research. In concluding this session, it'll be really interesting to see how the expansion of this research area takes place over the next few years as findings begin to develop and we have more work to draw upon. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.